Encyclical Letter Spe Salvi of the Supreme Pontiff Benedict XVI to the bishops, priests, and deacons, men and women religious, and all the lay faithful, on Christian hope. Spe Salvi factisumus, in hope we were saved, says St. Paul to the Romans, and likewise to us. According to this Christian faith, redemption, salvation, is not simply a given. Redemption is offered to us in the sense that we have been given hope, trustworthy hope, by virtue of which we can face our present. The present, even if it is arduous, can be lived and accepted if it leads towards a goal, if we can be sure of this goal, and if this goal is great enough to justify the effort of the journey. Now the question immediately arises, what sort of hope could ever justify the statement that, on the basis of that hope and simply because it exists, we are redeemed? And what sort of certainty is involved here? Faith is hope. Before turning our attention to these timely questions, we must listen a little more closely to the Bible's testimony on hope. Hope, in fact, is a key word in biblical faith, so much so that in several passages the words faith and hope seem interchangeable. Thus, the letter to the Hebrews closely links the fullness of faith to the confession of our hope without wavering. Likewise, when the first letter of Peter exhorts the Christians to be always ready to give an answer concerning the logos, the meaning and the reason of their hope, hope is equivalent to faith. We see how decisively the self-understanding of the early Christians was shaped by their having received the gift of a trustworthy hope. When we compare the Christian life with life prior to faith, or with the situation of the followers of other religions, Paul reminds the Ephesians that before their encounter with Christ, they were without hope and without God in the world. Of course, he knew that they had had gods. He knew that they had had a religion, but their gods had proved questionable, and no hope emerged from their contradictory myths. Notwithstanding their gods, they were without God, and consequently found themselves in a dark world, facing a dark future. In nihil ab nihilo quam cito residimus, how quickly we fall back from nothing to nothing. So says an epitaph of that period. In this phrase, we see in no uncertain terms the point Paul was making. In the same vein, he says to the Thessalonians, "You must not grieve as others do who have no hope." Here, too, we see as a distinguishing mark of Christians the fact that they have a future. It is not that they know the details of what awaits them, but they know in general terms that their life will not end in emptiness. Only when the future is certain, as a positive reality, does it become possible to live the present as well. So now we can say, Christianity was not only good news, the communication of a hitherto unknown content. In our language, we would say, the Christian message was not only informative, but performative. That means the gospel is not merely a communication of things that can be known. It is one that makes things happen and is life-changing. The dark door of time, of the future, has been thrown open. The one who has hope lives differently. The one who hopes has been granted the gift of a new life. Yet at this point, a question arises. In what does this hope consist, which, as hope, is redemption? The essence of the answer is given in the phrase from the letter to the Ephesians quoted above. The Ephesians, before their encounter with Christ, were without hope, because they were without God in the world. To come to know God, the true God, means to receive hope. We who have always lived with the Christian concept of God and have grown accustomed to it, have almost ceased to notice that we possess the hope that ensues from a real encounter with this God. The example of a saint of our time can, to some degree, help us understand what it means to have a real encounter with this God for the first time. I'm thinking of the African Josephine Bakhita, canonized by Pope John Paul II. She was born around 1869, she herself did not know the precise date, in Darfur in Sudan. At the age of 9, she was kidnapped by slave traders, beaten till she bled, and sold 5 times in the slave markets of Sudan. Eventually, she found herself working as a slave for the mother and the wife of a general, and there she was flogged every day till she bled. As a result of this, she bore 144 scars throughout her life. Finally, in 1882, she was bought by an Italian merchant for the Italian consul, Callisto Lignani, who returned to Italy as the Mahdists advanced. Here, after the terrifying masters who had owned her up to that point, Bakhita came to know a totally different kind of master. In Venetian dialect, which she was now learning, she used the name Paron for the living God, the God of Jesus Christ. Up to that time, she had only known masters who despised and maltreated her, or at best considered her a useful slave. Now, however, she heard that there is a Paron above all masters, the Lord of all lords, and that this Lord is good, goodness in person. She came to know that this Lord even knew her, that he had created her, that he actually loved her. She too was loved, and by none other than the supreme Paron, before whom all other masters are themselves no more than lowly servants. She was known and loved, and she was awaited. What is more, this master had himself accepted the destiny of being flogged, and now he was waiting for her at the Father's right hand. Now she had hope. No longer simply the modest hope of finding masters who would be less cruel, but the great hope. I am definitively loved, and whatever happens to me, I am awaited by this love, and so my life is good. Through the knowledge of this hope she was redeemed, no longer a slave, but a free child of God. She understood what Paul meant when he reminded the Ephesians that previously they were without hope and without God in the world. Without hope because without God. Hence, when she was about to be taken back to Sudan, Bakita refused. She did not wish to be separated again from her Paron. On January 9, 1890, she was baptized and confirmed and received her first Holy Communion from the hands of the Patriarch of Venice. On December 8, 1896, in Verona, she took her vows in the congregation of the Canossian Sisters, and from that time onwards, besides her work in the sacristy and in the porter's lodge of the convent, she made several journeys around Italy in order to promote the missions. The liberation that she had received through her encounter with the God of Jesus Christ, she felt she had to extend. It had to be handed on to others, to the greatest possible number of people. The hope born in her which had redeemed her, she could not keep to herself. This hope had to reach many, to reach everybody. The concept of faith-based hope in the New Testament and the early church. We have raised the question, can our encounter with the God who in Christ has shown us his face and opened his heart be for us too not just informative, but performative? That is to say, can it change our lives so that we know we are redeemed through the hope that it expresses? Before attempting to answer the question, let us return once more to the early church. It is not difficult to realize that the experience of the African slave girl Bakita was also the experience of many in the period of nascent Christianity who were beaten and condemned to slavery. Christianity did not bring a message of social revolution like that of the ill-fated Spartacus, whose struggle led to so much bloodshed. Jesus was not Spartacus. He was not engaged in a fight for political liberation like Barabbas or Bar Kokhba. Jesus, who himself died on the cross, brought something totally different. An encounter with the Lord of all lords, an encounter with the living God, and thus an encounter with the hope stronger than the sufferings of slavery, a hope which therefore transformed life and the world from within. What was new here can be seen with the utmost clarity in St. Paul's letter to Philemon. This is a very personal letter, which Paul wrote from prison and entrusted to the runaway slave Onesimus for his master Philemon. Yes, Paul is sending the slave back to the master from whom he had fled, not ordering, but asking, I appeal to you for my child, whose father I have become in my imprisonment. I am sending him back to you, sending my very heart. Perhaps this is why he was parted from you for a while, that you might have him back forever, no longer as a slave, but more than a slave, as a beloved brother. Those who, as far as their civil status is concerned, stand in relation to one another, as masters and slaves, inasmuch as they are members of the one church, have become brothers and sisters. This is how Christians addressed one another. By virtue of their baptism, they had been reborn. They had been given to drink of the same Spirit, and they received the body of the Lord together, alongside one another. Even if external structures remain unaltered, this changed society from within. When the letter to the Hebrews says that Christians here on earth do not have a permanent homeland, but seek one which lies in the future, this does not mean for one moment that they live only for the future. Present society is recognized by Christians as an exile. They belong to a new society, which is the goal of their common pilgrimage and which is anticipated in the course of that pilgrimage. We must add a further point of view. The first letter to the Corinthians tells us that many of the early Christians belonged to the lower social strata, and precisely for this reason were open to the experience of new hope, as we saw in the example of Bakita. Yet from the beginning there were also conversions in the aristocratic and cultured circles, since they too were living without hope and without God in the world. Myth had lost its credibility. The Roman state religion had become fossilized into simple ceremony which was scrupulously carried out, but by then it was merely political religion. Philosophical rationalism had confined the gods within the realm of unreality. The divine was seen in various ways in cosmic forces, but a God to whom one could pray did not exist. Paul illustrates the essential problem of the religion of that time quite accurately when he contrasts life according to Christ with life under the dominion of the elemental spirits of the universe. In this regard, a text by St. Gregory Nazianzen is enlightening. He says that at the very moment when the Magi, guided by the star, adored Christ the new King, astrology came to an end, because the stars were now moving in the orbit determined by Christ. This scene, in fact, overturns the worldview of that time, which in a different way has become fashionable once again today. It is not the elemental spirits of the universe, the laws of matter, which ultimately govern the world and mankind, but a personal God governs the stars, that is, the universe. It is not the laws of matter and of evolution that have the final say, but reason, will, love, a person. And if we know this person and he knows us, then truly the inexorable power of material elements no longer has the last word. We are not slaves of the universe and of its laws. We are free. In ancient times, honest inquiring minds were aware of this. Heaven is not empty. Life is not a simple product of laws and the randomness of matter, but within everything and at the same time above everything, there is a personal will. There is a spirit who in Jesus has revealed himself as love.